Dark, stormy night. Lightning flashes. A horse lies on the ground, barely breathing. Mud sticks to his trembling body. His owner kneels beside him, tears in his eyes. The rain poured down like the sky itself was weeping. Ethan clutched his horse's head, his fingers buried in the damp, sweat-soaked mane. Titan wasn't moving. His powerful chest barely rose, each breath weaker than the last. A cold fear gripped Ethan's heart. "Come on, boy. Stay with me," he whispered, voice shaking. The vet stood a few feet away, his expression grim, hopeless. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "There's nothing more we can do." The words hit like a hammer. Ethan's vision blurred. No, it could not end like this. The horse that had carried him through storms, through battles, through life itself, was slipping away. Everyone else had given up. But Ethan wasn't everyone else. His jaw clenched, his hands tightened, and then, in the pouring rain, he made a decision that would shock them all. Ethan had always believed that some bonds were unbreakable. Some friendships didn't need words. Some promises were made in the silence of shared experiences. And his bond with Titan was one of them. Ethan Carter wasn't the kind of man who spoke much. He never had been. At 35 years old, life had shaped him into a man of few words but deep emotions. He had grown up on this ranch, under the vast Texas sky, where work started before sunrise and ended long after the stars appeared. A tall, rugged man, his skin tanned from years in the sun, his hands rough from endless days of working the land. His piercing hazel eyes had seen loss, struggle, and survival. He had learned early that life on a ranch was tough, unforgiving, but it also taught him loyalty. Loyalty to the land, loyalty to family, and most of all, loyalty to Titan. Titan wasn't just any horse. Titan was his horse. Ethan had raised Titan from the day he was born. A fiery chestnut quarter horse, Titan was unlike any horse Ethan had ever known. There was something wild about him. Not in the reckless, untamed way of a Mustang, but in the way his eyes held something deeper. A kind of intelligence, an understanding beyond mere instincts. Titan was fast, powerful, and strong-willed. No one else could ride him at first. Ranch hands had tried. Cowboys with years of experience had failed. But Ethan? Ethan didn't tame Titan. He understood him. And Titan understood Ethan. It wasn't about commands or training. It was about trust. Through the years, they had been through everything together. When Ethan had lost his father in a tragic accident, Titan was the one who stood by him. Silent, steady, unshakable. When a wild storm tore through the ranch, flooding the land, leaving destruction in its wake, Titan was the one who had carried Ethan through it, saving him from being swept away. And when Ethan had faced his darkest days, his loneliest nights, Titan had been there. He never left his side. Titan wasn't just a horse, he was family. That morning, everything felt normal. Ethan sat in the saddle, feeling the rhythmic movement of Titan beneath him. The sun was warm on his skin, the breeze cool against his face. The land stretched out before him, endless, golden, and peaceful. Titan snorted, tossing his head slightly as if sensing something in the air. Ethan chuckled, patting his neck. "What is it, boy?" Titan had always been different, more aware, more intuitive. He had this way of knowing things before they happened. It was a running joke on the ranch. Titan's got a sixth sense. Some of the old cowboys even believed he was gifted, a horse with an uncanny ability to sense danger before it struck. Ethan never put much stock into it, but deep down, he had seen enough to know. Titan was special, and today, something about him felt off. Just a little, just enough to make Ethan pause. But he pushed the thought aside, because at that moment, under the warmth of the rising sun, in the quiet of the ranch, everything was perfect. Nothing bad could happen. Not today. Right? Titan's hooves thudded softly against the dirt road, his breath steady, his muscles rippling beneath the saddle. The sky stretched endlessly above them, painted in hues of orange and pink. Ethan inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp morning air fill his lungs. It was one of those rare mornings where everything felt right. No worries, no stress, just him and Titan. But in the back of his mind, something lingered. Titan had been acting a little off. Nothing obvious, nothing alarming. Just something. A slight hesitation in his step, a twitch of the ears, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Ethan had seen it before. Titan knew things. But today, Ethan ignored it. He shook his head, brushing off the thought. "Come on, buddy," he murmured, patting Titan's neck. "Let's get some work done." The sun climbed higher, and the ranch slowly came to life. And somewhere nearby, hidden from sight, a deadly mistake was waiting to happen. After the morning ride, Ethan led Titan back to the barn, unsaddling him carefully. He watched as Titan shook out his mane, muscles rippling beneath his chestnut coat. The horse was built like a warrior, strong, fast, resilient. Ethan smiled. "You're a damn good horse, you know that?" Titan snorted in response, nudging Ethan's shoulder with his nose. As always, their routine was the same. Titan got his usual grain mix, rich with nutrients. Fresh water in the trough. A treat. His favorite apples, sliced just right. Everything was normal. At least, that's what Ethan thought. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that this morning, something had changed. Somewhere along the way, a silent threat had slipped in. And it was already too late. It wasn't immediate. Titan ate like usual, chomping down his food, flicking his tail as Ethan finished up his chores. But then, something felt wrong. Titan's ears flicked back sharply. His head lifted suddenly, like he was startled by something Ethan couldn't see. A second later, his muscles stiffened. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" Titan shifted uncomfortably, his nostrils flaring, his breathing slightly heavier. A sharp pang of unease crawled up Ethan's spine. Titan had never reacted like this before. His gut whispered, "Something's wrong." But what? At first it was barely noticeable. Titan seemed a little restless, shifting his weight more than usual. Ethan chalked it up to the heat, or maybe an off morning. But then, within minutes, the symptoms worsened. Titan's head dropped lower, his ears twitching like he was trying to shake something off. His breathing changed, a little faster, a little uneven. He took a few unsteady steps back, his hooves scuffing against the barn floor. Ethan's stomach tightened. Something was wrong, really wrong. He stepped forward, reaching for Titan's halter. Hey, buddy, talk to me." Titan stumbled. Not just a slight misstep. His powerful legs buckled slightly, as if they weren't fully supporting him anymore. Ethan's pulse spiked. "Titan?" The horse let out a sharp exhale, his nostrils flaring, his head dipping lower. Ethan's hands tightened around the lead rope. A cold fear crept into his chest. This wasn't normal. Titan was getting worse by the second. Ethan called out for help. Ranch hands rushed over, concern on their faces. Titan was now visibly struggling. His breaths were shorter, his stance unsteady. Ethan turned toward one of the workers. "Get the vet." Now his own voice sounded shaky, like he already knew something terrible was happening. One of the younger ranch hands, Tyler, stepped closer, his brows furrowed. "Boss, I think—" He swallowed hard. "I think he might be poisoned." The words hit Ethan like a bullet. Poisoned? Number that wasn't possible. Titan was healthy, strong, careful. But as he looked at his horse, his best friend, struggling to stay upright, a terrifying realization sank in. This wasn't just a bad reaction. This was an attack. Something deadly was inside Titan's system. And if Ethan didn't do something fast, he was going to lose him. Ethan's mind raced as he crouched beside Titan, his fingers gripping the horse's halter. Poison. The word echoed in his skull, twisting his stomach into knots. This wasn't an accident. Something, or someone, had done this. Titan let out a weak, pained breath, his legs trembling as if they could give out at any second. Ethan couldn't breathe. Not Titan. Not like this. The sound of fast footsteps on gravel snapped Ethan out of his trance. The vet had arrived. Dr. Reynolds, a grizzled, no-nonsense vet who had been treating ranch horses for decades, hurried toward them. He took one quick look at Titan, and his face darkened. "What's wrong with him?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharp with desperation. The vet didn't answer immediately. Instead, he knelt, pressing his hands gently against Titan's side, feeling his pulse. A long silence. Then, Dr. Reynolds exhaled, shaking his head. "It's poisoning," he said flatly. Ethan's chest tightened. "No," he said automatically. "No way, that's—" His voice broke. "That's not possible." Dr. Reynolds looked up, his eyes serious. "It is." Ethan swallowed, his mind racing. "What kind of poison?" The vet hesitated. "Hard to say without tests, but judging by his symptoms, I'd bet it's something strong. Something meant to kill." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Something meant to kill. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "Can you fix it?" Dr. Reynolds hesitated. Titan stumbled again, nearly collapsing. The vet ran a hand through his graying hair. "Ethan, I don't think we can save him." Ethan stiffened. "No," he said immediately. "Number, you're wrong." Dr. Reynolds sighed, his voice soft but firm. "Ethan, listen to me. If it's what I think it is, we're too late. The poison has already spread. It's shutting his system down." Ethan shook his head violently. "You don't know that." Titan let out a soft, shuddering breath. Dr. Reynolds lowered his gaze. "I've seen this before," he murmured. "Once they start stumbling like this, there's no coming back." Ethan felt like he had been punched. No coming back? Number, not Titan. Not his horse. "Then tell me what I can do," Ethan snapped, his voice raw. "There's always a way. There's got to be a way." The vet hesitated, glancing at Titan's fading strength. Then, with obvious reluctance, he said, "We can try to flush his system. Activated charcoal, IV fluids, but—" Ethan's hope spiked. "Then let's do it." Dr. Reynolds' expression didn't change. "It's a long shot." "I don't care." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He's not dying today." Dr. Reynolds sighed. "I'll do what I can." The ranch hands rushed to prepare IV fluids, medications, emergency treatments. Ethan stayed beside Titan, stroking his neck, whispering. "You're a fighter," he murmured. "You hear me? You don't give up." Titan's ear twitched, barely. His body was cold with sweat, but Ethan refused to let him go. Dr. Reynolds worked quickly. He inserted the 4, his hands steady, but his eyes doubtful. This should help slow things down, but we're running out of time. Ethan clenched his teeth. "Not if I can help it." As the treatment started, Ethan's mind raced. Who would do this? Who would poison Titan? That's when one of the ranch hands hesitated. "Boss," the young man, Tyler, shifted nervously. I think I saw something this morning." Ethan whipped his head around. "What?" Tyler swallowed hard. "Before sunrise, I was checking the fences near the barn. I saw someone walking near the feed storage." Ethan's blood ran cold. Feed storage. Titan's food. His hands tightened into fists. "Who?" Tyler hesitated. I didn't see their face, but they weren't from the ranch." A slow, boiling rage built in Ethan's chest. Someone had been near Titan's feed. Someone had done this on purpose, and when he found out who, there'd be hell to pay. But first, he had to save Titan, because time was running out. The barn was silent except for the faint, unsteady breaths of a dying horse. Titan lay stretched out on the stall floor, his once powerful chest rising and falling in slow, weak movements. His coat, usually sleek and full of life, was now damp with sweat, his muscles trembling uncontrollably. Ethan knelt beside him, one hand gripping the horse's mane. His fingers were ice cold. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "Stay with me." But Titan didn't respond. His eyes, once so full of fire, were half-lidded, unfocused. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. Dr. Reynolds stood nearby, shaking his head. "Ethan." His voice was low, careful, too careful. Ethan's stomach clenched. He knew what was coming. The vet exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose before speaking. "We've done everything we can." Ethan's jaw locked. "No." Dr. Reynolds hesitated, but his voice was firm. "The IV fluids, the charcoal, they aren't working. It's too late. The poison has spread too far." Ethan shook his head. "No." Dr. Reynolds' expression softened. "Ethan, listen to me. There's nothing more we can do." Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears, his vision blurred with fury and helplessness. "Then you're not trying hard enough." Dr. Reynolds' face darkened. "Damn it, Ethan. You think I want to give up? I've been doing this for 40 years. I've seen this before. Once they stop fighting, they don't come back." Ethan's entire body stiffened, because as much as he hated it, Titan wasn't fighting anymore. The horse that had never backed down from anything was giving up. His breath hitched. Number not yet. Ethan stood abruptly, his boots scuffing against the dirt floor. Dr. Reynolds frowned. "Where are you going?" Ethan turned toward the door, his voice cold, sharp. "To find someone who actually knows how to save him." The vet let out a slow sigh. "Ethan." But Ethan was already gone. Ethan drove for hours. First, to a specialist vet 2 towns over. "I'm sorry. If the antidote didn't work, there's nothing left to try." Then, to an old rancher who had treated thousands of horses. "Son, I've seen this before. You need to let him go." Even to a university professor, an expert in animal toxins. "By now, the damage is irreversible. I'm truly sorry." Every door he knocked on, every phone call he made, every desperate plea, the answer was always the same. "There's nothing more you can do." Ethan sat in his truck parked outside the ranch, gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. His breath came in sharp, angry bursts. His best friend was dying, and no one was willing to help. Was this really it? Was Titan really going to die? The thought sent a sharp, stabbing pain through his chest, and for the first time in a long, long time, Ethan felt helpless. His hands shook, his eyes burned, but he refused to let a single tear fall. Titan deserved better than that. He deserved a fighter, and if no one else was going to fight for him, then Ethan would. Ethan slammed the truck door shut and stormed back into the house. He tore through old books, veterinary manuals, internet forums. There had to be something, some treatment, some cure, some insane, desperate, last-chance solution. Hours passed, the sky darkened, and then he found it, an old handwritten note buried deep in one of his grandfather's ranch journals. His grandfather had once saved a poisoned horse, not with medicine, not with a vet, but with something older, riskier, unproven. Ethan's heart pounded. It was crazy. No one would approve, but Titan was out of time. This was his only shot, and Ethan was going to take it. The barn was silent, too silent. Titan lay motionless on the stall floor, his once mighty body shivering, his breaths shallow and slow. The IV dripped steadily, but the vet's treatments hadn't worked. Ethan's jaw locked, his hands tightened around the old ranch journal, the worn pages rough against his fingertips. This was it, the moment of decision. Play it safe and let Titan slip away, or take a gamble no one would approve of. Ethan's grandfather's notes described an ancient cowboy remedy, something so risky, so untested, that no modern vet would ever attempt it. A homemade antidote, a mix of herbs, activated charcoal, adrenaline, and a brutal, shocking method to force the body to fight back. It was insane. If done wrong, it could kill Titan faster. But if it worked, Ethan's heart pounded. Titan's life was already slipping away. It was now or never. He turned toward Dr. Reynolds, who was checking Titan's vitals one last time. "I'm doing this," Ethan said. The vet barely looked up. He looked defeated. "Doing what?" Ethan held up the journal. Reynolds' eyes widened in shock. "You can't be serious." Ethan didn't blink. "I am." "That's—" Reynolds ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "That's not medicine, Ethan. That's desperation." Ethan's voice was deadly calm. "Then desperation's all I got." The vet hesitated. This could kill him. Ethan looked down at Titan, his best friend, his partner, the horse who had never given up on him. And he made his choice. "I'm doing it." The ranch hands gathered outside the barn, whispering, watching. No one believed this would work, but no one dared stop Ethan. He crushed the dried herbs, mixing them into a thick, dark paste. He added adrenaline, a dose so strong it could jumpstart a failing heart. He prepared a massive dose of fluids, ready to force Titan's body into a shock response. Dr. Reynolds stood nearby, arms crossed, his face grim. "This is madness," he muttered. Ethan ignored him. Then he administered the injection. Nothing happened. Titan didn't move. His breathing was still weak, still fading. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. The vet took a slow breath. "Ethan, I think—" And then Titan's body convulsed violently. Ethan's pulse spiked. Titan's muscles jerked, his legs kicking wildly against the floor. The ranch hands gasped. Someone cursed under their breath. Ethan lunged forward, pressing a hand against Titan's neck. "Easy, boy," he breathed. "Come on, fight." Titan's breathing hitched, his nostrils flaring. Then his entire body went completely still. For one horrifying moment, it looked like he was gone. Ethan's throat tightened. He was about to scream, about to curse himself for trying this. And then Titan inhaled, a deep, shuddering breath. His chest rose, and for the first time in hours, his eyes opened. The barn was silent. Titan lay there, alive, but barely. Ethan's entire body shook. Dr. Reynolds stared, speechless. I don't believe it." Titan's ears twitched slightly. His eyes were still dazed, still weak, but he was here, alive. Ethan let out a shaky breath, pressing his forehead against Titan's. "You scared the hell out of me, buddy." Titan snorted weakly. The ranch hands, still watching in stunned silence, slowly backed away. Some muttered about a miracle. Others still doubted Titan would ever recover. But Ethan? Ethan wasn't done fighting yet, because saving Titan was only half the battle. Now he had to bring him back to full strength. And someone out there had tried to take his horse from him. Ethan Carter wasn't just going to let that go. This wasn't over. Not yet. The air inside the barn was thick with tension. No one spoke. No one moved. Ethan knelt beside Titan, his hands gripping the horse's mane, his knuckles white. The remedy was in his system now. The gamble had been made, but Titan wasn't moving. For one horrifying moment, the world seemed to stand still. Ethan's breath came shaky, uneven. "Titan?" His voice barely broke the silence. No response, no twitch, no sign of life. Dr. Reynolds exhaled softly behind him. The ranch hands shifted uncomfortably. Then, the vet spoke. His words were final, cold, brutal. "Ethan, he's gone." Ethan's chest tightened as the words sank in. It couldn't end like this. Titan had fought so hard. He had always been a survivor, a warrior, and now he was just gone. Ethan's hands shook. His throat burned. His vision blurred with tears. he refused to let fall. Dr. Reynolds placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did everything you could." His voice was quiet, but firm. "It's over, Ethan." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Over. How could it be over? Titan had saved his life before, had carried him through storms, through battles, through moments where no one else was there. And now, just like that, he was gone. Ethan lowered his head, pressing his forehead against Titan's. His horse's body was still warm. A sob threatened to rise in his throat, but he swallowed it down. Then, just as he was about to break completely, a sound, so faint, barely there, a breath. Ethan's heart stopped, and then Titan's body shuddered. His nostrils flared slightly, a heartbeat, a twitch, a miracle. The ranch hands gasped. Dr. Reynolds stumbled back in shock. "No way." Titan's body twitched again. His legs shifted slightly, his ears flicking weakly. Ethan's pulse skyrocketed. He grabbed Titan's face gently. "Titan, come on, buddy. Stay with me." The horse blinked, weak, barely conscious, but alive. Dr. Reynolds ran a shaking hand down his face. I don't believe it." The other ranch hands whispered in awe. Someone even made the sign of the cross, as if they had just witnessed something holy. Ethan exhaled a shaky breath. His hands were still trembling as he stroked Titan's mane. "You stubborn son of a gun," he whispered, a broken chuckle escaping his lips. Titan let out a soft, rasping snort. Titan was alive, but he was far from okay. His body was still weak, trembling. His breathing was shallow. Dr. Reynolds quickly snapped back into action. He checked Titan's pulse, his breathing, his reflexes. After a long pause, he let out a slow exhale. "All right, he's fighting, but..." He glanced at Ethan, his face still full of doubt. "We don't know if he's really going to make it." Ethan nodded once. He had already accepted that. Titan wasn't just going to wake up and be fine. This fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Morning came. Titan was still breathing, but he hadn't tried to stand up. Dr. Reynolds called Ethan over. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Ethan, we need to talk." Ethan's stomach twisted. He didn't like that tone. The vet let out a slow sigh. "The poison. It may be out of his system, but the damage could be permanent." Ethan's heart pounded. "What are you saying?" His voice was sharp, like he already knew the answer and just didn't want to hear it. Dr. Reynolds hesitated before speaking. "He may never walk again." The words ripped through Ethan like a knife. The barn was silent. Titan, his Titan, a horse that had once run like the wind, who had saved his life so many times, could now be crippled forever? Ethan felt his throat tighten. His body tensed as if he'd been physically struck. "No." The word came out like a growl. Dr. Reynolds held up a hand. "Ethan, I'm not saying it's definite, but no." Ethan's voice was harder now, colder. "I don't accept that." The vet sighed. "Ethan." I said no. Titan wasn't done. Ethan wasn't done. If there was even a 1% chance that Titan could run again, Ethan was going to make it happen, no matter what. Ethan sat on the wooden floor beside Titan, his back leaning against the stall. The sun had risen, spilling golden light through the barn windows. Birds chirped in the distance. The ranch was waking up. But Titan? He hadn't moved. His powerful legs, the same legs that once thundered across open fields, fast and free, were still. Ethan's chest tightened. This horse had been his everything, and now he might never stand again. Dr. Reynolds had tried to prepare him for this. He had seen it before. The poison was out of Titan's system, but its effects? Unpredictable. It could have damaged his muscles, his nerves, his will to fight. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Titan wasn't done, not if Ethan had anything to say about it. "Come on, boy. Ethan's voice was steady, but his heart wasn't. He gently tugged Titan's halter, urging him. "You're not giving up. You hear me?" Titan's ears flicked slightly, but he didn't move. Ethan gritted his teeth. "You've carried me through storms, through wild chases, through the worst days of my life. And now you're telling me you can't stand?" Nothing. Titan's breathing was slow, deep. His eyes were open, but distant, like he was there, but not really there. Ethan swallowed hard. This wasn't just physical. Titan was broken. Something inside him had given up. And Ethan felt a sharp stab of fear, because if Titan stopped fighting, there was nothing he could do. But he wasn't giving up. Not today. Not ever. The other ranch hands stood near the barn doors, watching quietly. No one believed Titan would recover. They didn't say it, but Ethan could feel it. The silence, the looks, the pity. Even Dr. Reynolds had a new tone when he spoke to Ethan now. Software careful, like he was talking to a man clinging to a ghost. "Ethan," the vet finally said, stepping forward, "maybe it's time to think about—" Ethan's entire body tensed. Dr. Reynolds sighed. "I know you love him, but maybe—" "Don't say it." Ethan's voice was low, sharp. Reynolds hesitated. "Maybe it's time to—" "I said don't say it." The barn fell dead silent. Ethan's hands shook with rage. He turned toward the vet, his eyes burning. "He's not done. I know him." His voice cracked. "He's got more fight left." Dr. Reynolds held up his hands. "I hope you're right." But his eyes said something else. They said, "You're just fooling yourself." Ethan turned away, jaw clenched. They didn't understand. Titan wasn't just some horse. He was his brother, his partner, his savior. And now it was Ethan's turn to save him. That night, Ethan stayed by Titan's side. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just talked, told him stories, told him about the first time he rode him, the time Titan saved him from a charging bull, the time they ran together, fast as the wind. And then, in the dead of night, Ethan said the words that broke him completely. "I can't do this without you." Titan's ears twitched. Ethan exhaled shakily, pressing his forehead against his horse's. "I don't know what comes next. I don't know how to fix this." His voice cracked. "But if you don't fight, neither will I." Silence. Then, a sound. Software weak. But there, a deep exhale from Titan's nostrils. A shift, a tiny movement. Ethan's heart stopped. Titan's legs tensed, and then he tried. Ethan scrambled backward, his pulse racing. Titan's legs shook violently as he tried to push up. His hooves scraped against the barn floor. Ethan didn't dare breathe. Titan struggled, fell back down. Ethan's chest clenched. Then Titan tried again. His muscles shuddered, his nostrils flared. His entire body trembled under the weight of the battle he was fighting. Then, with one final, desperate push, Titan stood. The barn was silent. The ranch hands stared, wide-eyed. Dr. Reynolds took a stunned step forward. "Ethan?" He was laughing and crying all at once. "You stubborn son of a—" His voice broke. Titan stood there, weak but unbroken. His eyes met Ethan's. And in that moment, Ethan knew. Titan wasn't just going to walk again. He was going to run. Ethan stood by the fence, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His jaw clenched. Every ranch hand, every worker, even Dr. Reynolds. They were all watching, waiting, holding their breath. Titan stood in the center of the corral, his chestnut coat gleaming under the rising sun. His muscles were leaner now, his body thinner from the battle he had fought. But his eyes were alive again. Ethan's heart pounded. Today was the final test. Titan had survived. He had stood. He had taken steps. But could he run again? And if he couldn't? Ethan didn't let himself finish that thought. He refused to believe in failure. Not now. Not after everything. Titan snorted, shifting his weight. His ears flicked back, then forward. Ethan's fingers curled into his palm. "Come on, buddy." Titan lowered his head slightly, his hooves shuffling in the dirt. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Doubt. "Maybe we're pushing too hard," someone muttered. "He might never run again," another whispered. Ethan's chest burned. He had heard these words before, the first night Titan had collapsed, the night everyone told him there was no hope. And yet, Titan was still here, still standing, still fighting. Ethan took a deep breath. Then he took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Titan," he murmured, voice steady but thick with emotion. "You ready?" Titan lifted his head. Their eyes met. For a moment, everything else faded away. The ranch hands, the whispers, the doubts. It was just them, man and horse, a bond unbroken. And then Ethan did the only thing he could do. He let go. He stepped back, spreading his arms wide, his voice soft but firm. "Run, boy." Titan hesitated. Then he took one step forward, then another. Ethan held his breath. Titan's hooves dug into the dirt. He let out a sharp exhale, and then he moved. A slow, uncertain trot. His muscles trembled, his legs still weak. But he didn't stop. Ethan's hands curled into fists. "Come on, Titan. Show them." Titan's pace quickened. His steps became stronger. The whispers in the crowd stopped. All eyes were locked on the horse who wasn't supposed to survive. Titan snorted. And then he ran. A gasp rippled through the crowd. No one moved. No one spoke. Titan's hooves pounded against the earth, his body pushing forward, faster, stronger. The ranch hands, the doubters, even Dr. Reynolds, they all watched in stunned silence. This was the horse they said would never stand again. The horse they told Ethan to give up on. And now he was running. Titan's muscles stretched, his legs lengthening with each stride. At first, there was hesitation, a slight limp, a moment of weakness. But then, something changed. Titan's ears flicked forward, his chest expanded, his pace quickened, and suddenly, he was flying. The wind rushed past him, lifting his mane, brushing against his sleek coat. The same powerful stride that once carried Ethan through storms, across endless fields, through battles only they understood. It was back. Ethan felt his chest tighten, his vision blurred, his breath caught. Titan wasn't just running, he was free. And in that moment, Ethan knew Titan had won. The silence broke. Gasps turned into cheers. The ranch hands, the workers, even the doubters began clapping, shouting, laughing in disbelief. Dr. Reynolds took a slow step forward, shaking his head, a breathless chuckle escaping his lips. "I don't believe it," he muttered. "That horse, he's a miracle." Ethan just smiled, because deep down, he had never doubted, not for a second. He knew Titan wasn't done, and now the world knew it too. Titan finally slowed, his chest rising and falling with deep, powerful breaths. He turned his head, ears perked and eyes searching. Searching for Ethan. Ethan stepped forward. No words were spoken. He just placed a hand on Titan's forehead, letting the warmth of his best friend seep into his palm. The same horse who had saved him so many times. The same horse who had refused to die. And now, he was stronger than ever. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "You were never just a horse." Titan blinked slowly, exhaling softly. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat thick with emotion. "You were my family." Titan nudged him gently, like he understood, because maybe, in some way, he did. The ranch stood still. The sun shone high in the sky, and Titan, the horse who was never supposed to survive, ran faster than ever. Some stories aren't just about survival. They're about refusing to give up no matter the odds. Titan's fight wasn't just his own. It was Ethan's fight too. When the world said, "Let go," he held on tighter. When everyone doubted, he believed. How many times in life do we face moments where giving up seems like the only option? But maybe, just maybe, that's when we need to fight the hardest. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share this with someone who needs a reminder. True strength comes from never giving up.